Just a few little introductions and notes before we get started. As most of you just heard, we are recording this event, just as an FYI. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Anne Missoni. I'm the Dean of the School at the International Center of Photography. Welcome. I want to start by thanking the Society for Photographic Education, who we remain affiliated with and who has been generous enough to let us use their Zoom account. SPE is a member-based organization. For those of you who are not familiar, we'll be dropping their website in the chat window momentarily. For those of you who are new to FotoFika and who would like to get emails reminding you about upcoming meetings and workshops, please put your name, or well, actually, don't need to put your name, just your email address in the chat window, but please make sure you're directing that to me individually, because I am the one who is updating our mailing list. And so I'm looking for those private messages to catalog. And again, I just need your email address and we will add you. I promise we are not selling our email list. We really are only going to send you an email reminder about an upcoming meeting. And of course, you can always direct to me or to us in that from that email address, anything you want to unsubscribe from. So typically we would be talking about putting you all on chat, on mute, and et cetera. But today things are a little different. So please robustly use the chat feature for questions and feedback as Betsy takes us through the workshop. But also do not hesitate to unmute yourself at any point during the workshop with questions or input, et cetera, or breaking news out of Washington, D.C. So Betsy, over to you.
And you're muted, Betsy.
By way of a bad teaching model, starting with a disclaimer, I had hoped to get super organized over the last hour, and I have been in front of the TV. But those of you who know me know that actually this is how I pretty much do everything anyway. So I have a couple questions, I think, that I'd like to go through, and I'll just tell you what my thought process is about the structures. First, Tom, are you here? All right. Well,
yeah, Tom's here.
Yes, I'm
here. Okay, yeah. So Tom has offered to talk about his experience teaching this past semester, teaching darkroom class. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience. And then for those of you who haven't seen Edgar's FotoFika, Edgar Cardenas, and Jonathan's, so 2 sessions that we had this fall where they both came with really interesting approaches to teaching darkroom. So I'm not going to revisit those, but I'd really say, and listen to their 10-minute, 20-minute clips, and you're going to get tons of ideas. But so what I'd like to do is start by having Tom talk, and I'll talk, and any of you who want to share your experience of your darkroom class since the pandemic. After that, I'd like everyone to think about and write down some of the most important things you think happen in a darkroom class. And I'm going to ask you to think broadly and conceptually in terms of what you think is important for the students to get out of it. And then also kind of skill-wise. And partly what we're going to do is tease out a little bit of strategies for ways to make those things happen or make decisions about things that we really can't make happen. And I think that's those are really important ways to go forward about problem solving. What can you get done and what can't you get done? Now, this is going to vary probably almost from institution to institution. I'm teaching online for ASU, so this is a non-issue for that, but I'm teaching in person at Emerson, and we have a hybrid plan that, well, I'll quickly talk about my situation, where the students can develop film, but they can't print. And we meet with them, an hour and 40 minutes, 45 minutes a week. So those are my specific challenges.
Servants
So
who work at the Republic.
So anyway,
Rule of law.
Does someone have the news coming through? Does anyone else hear that? All right, just,
I muted them, so
okay.
I will mute
Anyway.
you if the news comes in.
Okay, anyway, I'm like, so those are the first couple steps. And then, you know, what your situation is, what your school situation is going to affect the kinds of solutions that you pick. And I think, and then I think crowdsourcing, I think working together for solutions that you found or solutions that you want. And then I'd like us to create a document or some place to live some of these solutions. And the solutions, we'll see what they are. It's not preloaded, but things I'm thinking about too is all the way from, you know, a workflow a black and white workflow on, you know, on Photoshop. Okay, that's something I want. I'm working towards. Or a alt process, or even just brainstorming for how to get the students to get these experiences that you think are important. And I think, again, the old kind of FotoFika thing is also about like supporting each other and going into the classroom and knowing that in some ways you might feel like you're compromising and you're doing your best, but I also feel like there's this potential for rejuvenation and discovery. I'm going to let Tom talk about his class now, but start thinking about what you think is most important in it. What do you need your students to get out of the darkroom class? All right, over to you, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. I appreciate that. Hey, everybody, my name is Tom Leininger. I teach at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. It's a pretty small program, the overall art program there. We have a Photo 1, which is a darkroom class. We have a Photo 2, which is digital, and we have a Photo 3, which traditionally is students can pick their own, very self-directed. It's a sandwich class with Photo 2, if you know what that means. Mainly 2 classes make 1, so I get a class, but it's really 2 classes. Is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yeah, I can make that happen.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
Yep.
So I've been teaching also hybrid with 2 computers. It's a little weird for me to just have 1 screen here. I have no idea if this is working. So it's sort of, I wouldn't have thought that 5 months ago. 2 computers, that's the land of milk and honey. Now it's like, I can't do it without 2 computers. It's sort of interesting how that goes. So essentially, Photo 1 is made up of, so we don't really have, I don't think we really, I'm new to this program. I've been here, like I said, 18 months, a very small program. We don't really have like photo majors. People can take Photo 3, multiple times, but Photo 1 is sometimes the only experience students get. They like the darkroom. We have the darkroom. I went back on campus this semester because I felt like I was pressured to, and because part of that was I knew students were taking Photo 1 because they wanted the darkroom experience. So let me see if I can share my screen here, and then
All right, we got it.
okay, and then I made like a little little thing here. Okay.
You're so organized.
Well, yeah, I had
Like
time
a
on my
teacher.
hands, and I was trying to figure out a new application for another class. So, okay. So the whole reason why I felt like I could do this was based on the facilities we have. There are 2 separate dark rooms with a total of like 15 enlargers, 16 enlargers, but 2 rooms, 2 separate sinks. As you can see here, they're slot vented on the side. The ventilation made me think I can do this because of the ventilation. I can do this because, I figured out a way to assign students to particular enlargers, and then that was their enlarger. And then I tried to schedule when students were there, so I didn't have more than 3 at most. I started with just 2 at most. I said, you're only in here 2 at a time. Eventually it became 3 at a time if people were spaced out. The end of the semester, that got really tricky in the crush of like people trying to get things done, because I'd have two people who were right next to each other who needed to print at the same time. And I'm like, you've got to wait and all that. But everyone kind of rolled with it. Also, there are individual rooms where people process film. I have 7 of these, again, with the ventilation, sink, and then there's everything they need in that particular room. Door shuts, they can total darkness, everything. So again, that was like, okay, people can isolate there. That was the first step. I knew we could process film. I thought we could print. We ended up being able to print. And then it worked pretty well. Now, the other thing is like, I've got this very large space and then computers and all that. And originally there were a lot of tables kind of like this, and people would sit at tables. I took all the tables out. I marked, you can see the little black marks on the floor with tape. I had the certain number of chairs for any given period of time, and everybody would be spaced out. It was sort of like, if you're in here, you're working. It wasn't really like a hangout kind of place. It wasn't sort of like you can just sort of chill out with your friends. Like you're either in the dark room, you're developing film, or you're not in here. Or someone could be, working at our 2 computers for our digital lab. Here's our digital lab. So how did I handle this? So one thing we do is that I've got a number of cameras, and everybody gets a camera. I've got just enough cameras that everybody's able to have one camera for the entirety of the semester. So that involved, and that usually goes, I hand the cameras out and I go around to each student individually and show them how to load it, how to look through the, what they see when they look through the viewfinder and all of that. And I decided I have to make that video. Now, I had been thinking about doing that anyways, because some students were like, hey, can you show me how to do this again? I can't remember how to do that. And of course, there's a lot of different cameras. It'd be so much easier if everybody had the same camera, but that doesn't happen. So I made a lot of kind of really straightforward videos. Just like in my office here, you can sort of see, I just used my phone. Everything was like one take pretty much. And it was like, here's how you put the film in. Here's a little quirk of this camera. This camera doesn't have a meter, things like that. And then I'd take a picture, like looking through the viewfinder of a pair of scissors, orange handled scissors that were like in focus and out of focus, so they could understand what like looking through in focus and out of focus looked like and how the metering system worked. Created a page in Canvas for each camera with a link to the manual I found. Luckily there's a lot of resources out there. That was a lot of work. I was glad I did it. It saved me a lot of time. I handed out cameras on day 1. I said, go buy film. Surprisingly, I'm lucky there are 2 camera stores in this area, both stock black and white film. So that kind of helped. I just said, buy 2 rolls of film and buy 25 sheets of paper. Normally I'm like, buy 10 rolls of film and you're gonna need 100 sheets of paper. I'm like, just 25 sheets and 2 rolls. I don't know how long we're gonna be in the dark room. Made a lot of videos, handed out cameras, and I was like, look at your camera, watch the video. If you have questions, come to me then, but that's how you're gonna get that. And this is sort of, what Canvas sort of looked like. You can sort of see here all the different cameras that we had. And then, I had a picture of the camera. It was a lot of work, but I was kind of glad I did it. It's done, and I'll be able to, carry it forward. Now I have not, I've not really looked at the stats on who's looking at all this stuff in Canvas, because I just don't have the space for that in my head. It's like, it's there. I tell them it's there. Tell them they can always Google something too. So some cameras work better than others. I'm about ready to tell them that they should all get a light meter app for their phone just to confirm. I think that I've got a couple cameras that don't have meters. I think that would just be a good thing. I think that might help reinforce exposure a little bit. Yeah, so what happened? Okay, so these are just, so it worked out. Normally I've got 5 assignments. I did 3. The first one was a portrait assignment, which sort of worked. And it was 2 prints, I think. And we were processing, I demonstrated processing film in front of them in that large room on the third day of class, I think, after talking about exposure on the second day of class. And then we started, and then they were divided into groups, 2 groups of about 15 students. So one group had 7, one group had 8. I assigned students to those individual rooms. I assigned students to the dark room. I made charts. And then, you know, we were going to see if it worked, and it ended up working. So I'm just kind of going. I don't mean to be going.
That's good. That's good.
So here's okay. So how did I teach? You know, because I saw Jonathan's presentation, and I was like, man, Jonathan made more videos than I did, because Ilford's got good videos online on how on just like the basics on how to make a print and all that. I showed those. I made a handout. I left that. I wasn't gonna, I'd run out of time. I didn't really have time to make here's how you make a print. But what I did was I took small groups into the dark room of, I think, 4, and I kind of demoed everything. And we did that over 2 weeks, 4 class periods. And then they made a print. And that worked pretty well, you know. So not having smaller groups work better, right? That's pretty obvious. But having just 2 people in the darkroom at a time, I think worked a lot better. Smaller groups kind of processing film at the same time worked a lot better. I didn't feel like I had to go back and forth between a group that was waiting and a group that was working, things like that. I think that fewer assignments meant better work. So what were my assignments? So we had a portrait assignment, and then I have what's called a narrative assignment, which deals with multiples, this idea of like a wide, medium, and a tight, working with the idea of still photography working within a narrative framework. And then I have an assignment called emotive photographs, which were 3 photographs that make you feel something, that aren't necessarily documents and are sort of like the opposite of what we had just done. They could still use the same technical framework and things like that. These 3 pictures here are just some examples. I thought of the better examples I got of people working with the emotive photographs. I think that the prints in general turned out pretty well. Biggest thing I let go of was I did not have them spot their prints. And that was the hardest. Okay, so the only thing harder than them not spotting prints, and this is probably going to turn some people off, but this is, you know, my background is newspaper photography. I started in journalism. I worked as a daily newspaper photographer for 10 years, and then I went to grad school. I learned in black and white. I made prints. So I learned that it wasn't done until the print was spotted. And how I learned to spot was I bought my own brush, dipped it in a communal thing, kind of used a spare print, and then diluted it by putting it on my tongue. And you don't do that, but it's like a muscle habit. Like when I demo spotting, it's the hardest thing for me not to show that because it just is, it's there. But we didn't spot. And I was okay with that. We went all the plastic reels. I'm not a fan of plastic. I am a fan of plastic reels if I have to get students who are going to use 4 rolls of film and I need all 4 to kind of turn out. Plastic reels work better on that. We had recently upgraded all our filters to the newest Ilford filters, and that helped a lot too. I'd had a bunch of old Kodak filters and it was like everything just seemed flat. The other thing I learned is students touch an awful lot of stuff in the darkroom. Students touch an awful lot of stuff in a classroom, right? So we had buckets of wipes, and I'd say when you're done in the developing your film, you're going to clean everything, you're going to rinse everything out, you'll leave it to dry. You'll wipe everything down. The loop, the shared scissors to sleeve film. I would kind of go, I had wipes there. I said, wipe these down, shared grease pencils, right? And it's a small program. I don't have a big budget. I didn't want to buy 15 pairs of scissors for everybody. I didn't want to buy 15 grease pen, I mean, trying to just kind of get by with what I have. I set up all the chemistry for them. We do have some outside lab hours that we use kind of sporadically. But it's very much like this is a very self-contained kind of thing. Sometimes a quarter of the class may go on and take photo 2. I look at the 2 classes separately. So there are people who have had photo 2 that will then come back and do photo 1. As far as I know, no one got sick as a result of being in the lab. We had to have masks on. Everybody was distanced. It's hard for me to look at a print and not get close. It's hard for me to not go look at a student's enlarger and not be like this. It's, we use metal tongs. I just had one set of tongs, remembering to clean the tongs sometimes got to be, it's sort of like, I didn't really have more than 3 students in there because then it's like 3 sets of tongs and it's like, these are yours, It's hard for me not to be in their personal space when I'm teaching. I
think that's a really important takeaway, as is letting, I wouldn't say lowering standards, but changing expectations, not being with them. I think it's something that's goes across whether you're doing hybrid or reduced in person or totally remote. For me, that's one of the hardest things, the physical space from the students.
Okay, so I can kind of show you like, let me see if I can do this here. Okay, so I actually, give me just a second here. Okay. So I got an Elmo, the school provided me with an Elmo, and these things are great. The cheap workaround sucked, which was why I used my phone because I had to kind of come up with it on my own. But okay, so print quality, right? I'm a big believer in they're going to print full frame. I told them to print full frame. Most of them did. I keep telling myself one of my projects this semester is I'm going to go in and finish filing out all the negative carriers just so they're more consistent. Like I said, I came up in the 90s.
You are old school.
I came up in the 90s.
Like 100% old school.
So we don't make contact sheets. They learn to read the negative, and I want them to print full frame. And most of the time, they'll make one. I tell them, I say, most of the time they were able to get prints within like 3-4 pieces of paper. When they started thinking about it, because I was like, if you think, if everything's exposed right, it's going to print better. If it's processed right, it's going to do that. And at one point, I even introduced pushing film. So, I'm in Wisconsin, it gets dark. I'll probably start with pushing film, next semester. This was a picture a student got. She was in this abandoned greenhouse or something and found these foxes. And I was just like, whoa, right? But it drives me crazy that this thing is not spotted. But I mean, that's just something I'm letting go of because it is, my experience is spotting is really hard to teach if you're trying to get people to spot like 8 prints total and have it look okay. And Arthur Fields was somebody who I was like, Arthur, I don't know if I can not have them spot. And he's like, you got to let go of it. I'm like, all right. Because again, this was like, I'm not going to buy 15 brushes. And I didn't, it was like, we're sharing enough stuff. I didn't want, what else? I didn't want more things, I didn't want one more thing that everybody's touching, right? But so how was the work? The work ended up being pretty good for what it is. I mean, a lot of this was their first class, their first photo class.
Yeah.
And if they could expose the film and make a print with a decent tonal range, I was happy. Now, and sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, just go ahead. Go ahead.
So in the middle of it, the student was having some trouble. She had a Pentax K1000, and as if anybody has a K1000s in their arsenal that they're lending out, those things, it can slip off the leader can slip off the take-up spool kind of easily. And she was like, "Oh, I'm realizing that, I thought that printing was the hardest, but the camera is the hardest." And I said, that made me kind of think of like, man, maybe they're just not making enough pictures. And again, this goes back to me, my background, and all that, where part of me was like, you know what I need to do? I need to blow this all up. And next semester, we don't do anything with multiples. And it's like, they're just making a fresh picture every week. So they use the camera and all that. That's what I'm struggling with now. But I don't know if that's going to happen, because overall the class said that they really liked the experience of working in multiples and all that. So
I think that's a really good segue, Betsy, back to one of the things that you had said you wanted to cover, which is what needs to be covered and what are the strategies for getting that out there.
Right. And I think that this is right. I think we should think about that, what needs to get covered. And Tom, some of the things that I think that you talked about that are really important is your own sense of what has to be done. My students, for example, think that not spotting is trendy. That was a whole nother thing. And I was just trying to get them to do it in Photoshop. But I think
I have gotten into near yelling matches with students.
I don't doubt it.
How spotting is not a sign of the artist's hand.
Right.
Spotting is sloppy. And again, as John can attest, I'm old school on this. And because the person, when I said I'm not good at spotting, the guy that was teaching me, well, we also had to put like 1-inch pica tape around all our pictures too at this one paper I was working at. And I was bad at that too. And he got in my face and he's like, "I guess you're not good enough to be here." So, spotting is an emotional thing for me. So
let me pull that back to, obviously for Tom, spotting is something that's going to go on his list of things that's really important. I do think the structure of Tom's class, where he had access to a dark room. Yes. Sounds like you did a lot yourself. I had access to a dark room. Lauren, who's here too, who is co-teaching, we had a tech who did tons of work. And I think Lauren and Camilo also, it took a lot. So even to have a dark room available takes tons of work. And I think it's very clear from Tom that if you have that, it's going to feel compromised, but you're also kind of lucky. I wonder if there's anyone here who had to really, I taught, as I mentioned, the students could develop film. I demoed it with a dry version because the room that I'm using was dry, and just let them go. And they had a lot less time than usual. And I had to let go of a lot of things that I was used to controlling. And like I said, being near the students was really hard. I personally think in some ways they did better, not having me breathe down their neck. But is there anyone out there who had either, like Edgar, I think that if those of you who are here know, he had students pick up pinhole cameras and they used sheet film, and they had a little developer that each one of them could develop the film at home. And they did weekly Zoom sessions, 3-hour Zoom sessions where the students worked. So they were pretty much totally remote. But is there anyone here who's had anything in between, any other strategies or any other, David?
Yeah, we at Iowa facilities didn't allow us to use the darkroom at all. And so we did a hybrid. We're lucky to have one classroom that had computers and scanners and a sink. So we had students shoot and develop film in class during class, and then scan the film in and output digitally. But to enable them to work with light sensitive material, we've introduced pre-made cyanotype paper and digital negatives, as well as lumen prints. We weren't allowed to send chemistry home with any students, and so we rotated A days and B days to where only 5 students came in at a time, and all of their kind of conceptual work was online. So they had only class time to work in the lab to develop and scan, and then they took everything home to digitally work through it.
Did they make digital negatives? Did you say that? So they
did.
spit out, and then they made cyanotypes with the digital negatives.
Yep.
How did it work?
It worked. It was amazing. It was, everybody really responded well to it, and the cyanotype exercises weren't a specific assignment. I scrapped all kind of themed assignments, and students chose one project to work on throughout the whole semester. And so when we introduced the lumen prints, the cyanotypes, either photograms or the digital negatives, it enhanced their projects and what they thought their projects could be. So some students ended up having a portfolio of scanned black and white images. Other students took on the cyanotypes and the digital negatives. And so it really, it turned into a conversation of what materials you're going to use to look at this idea and concept. And it was one of the more kind of beneficial and productive classes I've probably ever taught. All the students had a portfolio of their own kind of imagined work, and worked around some kind of technical issues. I think I gave up on like some of my like rigid, like it needs to look like this, and kind of let students kind of like, oh, well, your camera messed up, or you're still trying, instead of shooting 16 rolls a semester, we're only shooting 8. So you don't have that much experience. So let's look at this photograph that's out of focus, and how can this be applied towards your concept? And so really opening the door for experimentation, and opening the door for understanding how their materials can be manipulated or react to those materials was eye-opening for me as like a really kind of rigid technician in the darkroom. But it was really beneficial. It was difficult, and just kind of maintaining, making sure that I'm working with 2 classes, which turned into 4 classes because A days and B days, but also since each student was working on their own projects, like really digging into my lectures, making sure that each lecture could speak to the students' interests. So there was kind of constantly re-evolving and re-evaluating what was being shared within the reading discussions and within the lectures too.
And that was also introductory level. Is that right? Or
so it's considered photo 2 at Iowa, but you do not have to take the digital photo 1. So I had some students that didn't have experience with digital photography, and other students that had taken our photo 1 class.
one of the things I would say when I was listening to Tom, and also that Tom's in this particular situation where he's got control over a very small space, and that allows like the kind of control that we couldn't necessarily do at VCU, but like wiping everything down, all the things that you were talking about are the things that we should all be doing anyways, right? And in a darkroom space, right? Like I work with people that are in the food industry, and they're like, all of the things we're having everybody do is what they should have been doing. And that's why people aren't getting food poisoned anymore. So it is a thing where like there should be less spotting because it should be cleaner.
Are there anyone else? That was great. That was really useful, and a lot of great ideas there. I'm interested in that digital negative cyanotype solution.
Betsy, I'm sorry, could I add something? Just real quick? Okay, so one of the things that was sort of required of my university was the class was listed as what they were calling modified tutorial, which meant that if you went online, I would provide some sort of accommodation for you.
Okay.
And I said, look, if you're in this class, you're here because you want to do this. If something comes up and you can't come to class, let me know. And I had a number of people who had a quarantine and all that. And I said, just don't worry about this class. I don't want to switch gears on you just yet. And up until I'd say the last week, I had 2 students that had a quarantine at the very end and kind of ran out of time. For them, I had them make digital pictures on their phone using the Lightroom app, and then convert those into black and white and turn those in. But that was like the extreme example. There were some other students where I was like, just wait, we'll get you caught up. You can print later when you come back and all that. And I didn't really have a plan for if I was forced to go online, I would figure it out and probably switch to the phones and Lightroom. But I didn't, if someone couldn't be there, I just said, just don't worry about the class, worry about other things. Just, don't worry about that. So that was the one. I feel like if I was really lacking in something, is that I did not have a plan for that.
So I think Arthur has something he wants to say, but Dana was actually asking that exact similar question about that. Arthur, did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, I did have a question for anybody. We had no access to a darkroom at all. And my students, I couldn't send chemicals home or anything. And so what I ended up doing is the one thing that was missing, we did everything digitally, and the students could use any camera that they had. And we basically only looked at images on the screen, Zoom. I was teaching from Texas, away from my school. So, and our building is getting remodeled. So they couldn't even have access while I was gone to our darkroom or our digital area at all. So I sent home, I made packets, and I sent to each student pre-coated cyanotype paper and regular paper that they could do lumen prints on. And so they made lumen prints and they did cyanotypes, unfixed lumen prints, and they did that at home, and we did those as guided projects. But the thing that I was really missing is I was wondering if anybody had any experience with doing those having them shoot the film, mailing the chemistry into those companies that mail it and send you back your negatives or your digital prints and things. Because I was thinking about giving my students prepaying for it. I mean, I live in a rural area, so I have to pay for everything for my students, all their film, their paper supplies. I give them that every semester. So I was going to give them a gift card or give them an account at these places, have them get their film, send it off, get it back, and do it that way. But I just feel that they're missing that tangible print and the black and white experience that they're signing up for, that they're not getting in my class. And I feel like I'm letting them down in that aspect, because it's basically turned from a analog film class to a digital class. The only physical, tangible thing they have is the cyanotypes and lumen prints. And I think that's still lacking. It's still not the same.
That comes back to some of the ideas of compromise, which is a huge, and which is partly why I thought it would help to have people think about brainstorming about what's really important. And there is going to be a lack in some of them. But it sounds like what do you think at the end, what your students came up with? Did it feel like it was a valuable experience?
It was a valuable experience for when it came to composition and content. I just don't feel like, a lot of us, I know we're so used to that darkroom, that tangible feel of a print. I love a print, and so that's the only thing that I think they were really missing. They weren't as connected to, a lot of them did like the cyanotypes. They thought that was neat. And the lumen prints were okay, but I still don't think they had that connection to the print that we're used to having. And maybe it's just me that's the loss, that I feel sad about it. The students may not even have that same feeling, but that's just the thing that I'm trying to get across, that I want to try to figure out a way to bridge that gap for them.
Yeah.
Because how do I make that class different from my regular digital class?
Well, and I think this is something that photography has been struggling with before the pandemic as well, in terms of the inequities of resources at different institutions and what it means to have a photo education. And in one respect, perhaps this is an opportunity for us to actually revisit, what are those priorities, back to Betsy's prompt. What is the agenda? What are our expectations? And what are our expectations as educators about what it means to be a trained photographer? Because I think that also has been shifting for so much time now, but it's come to a head in terms of the learning environment in real practical ways.
And that also brings up the conversation of where analog photography fits into this conversation, right? So, plenty of programs. I came from Iowa. our photo one was darkroom photography. And, you know, that's, if you wanted to get into photography, that's where you were. At VCU, it's not that. It's part of the curriculum, but it's not your point of entry. And that becomes a thing where, like, what do we want to imbue with our students in analog photography? Because analog photography isn't going to be what they're doing, right? If they're going out into the workforce. Ooh, did I just say that word?
Yeah.
But they're not, you know, that's not necessarily going to be the thing that they do. It might be something they incorporate into their practice. It might be something that is, it might be, but it isn't the primary thing that the majority of photographers are going to be working in. So,
But I think that's true. And I think that's good for letting ourselves off the hook in a way that we could have this feeling like, oh my God, their education is going to be totally incomplete because they won't have made that perfect silver print. On the other hand, I increasingly over the last couple of years have realized that this part of learning silver, or not even silver, learning analog, operating in the physical world is huge for them. Like, they learn things that 15 years ago, people knew how to do things. And Nadia, I don't know if she's here. Nadia once said that she's like, students these days don't know how to deal with physical gravity. They don't know. And I think that there's so many things that they get out of it. And it is the silver print. Like, I just wanted to say to Arthur, I understand that, even though I went into my class this semester feeling bad about it and like saying you're not going to make prints. And some students absorb that. And some students are like, no, this is great. We're lucky to be doing anything at all. And I realized my own attitude had a lot to do with it too. And one more thing is Carol, last spring, Carol Golombowski, we traded Zoom visits, and she gave us an 1.5-hour tour of her darkroom. And it was actually like pretty great. Like, the students got to see the inside of a darkroom. So those are just a couple thoughts I had in relation to that.
So Betsy, what that sort of reminds me of is that we're trying to not create a lost generation of students in terms of their education of photography, recognizing the value of some of the things that are more about making than and the expression of photography, less so than about what they'll do, but that they have this visceral, this tactful experience of photography. And that's where we're being challenged in terms of the darkroom. We don't want them to be the lost generation of students who won't have had the experience, or that we might be able to, you know, create something that has something akin to. And I'm watching a lot of the feed and suggestions and you know, and we're doing it this way. And it's a real, if nothing else, the thing that seems to keep coming up is this, that, well, we're being forced to slow down. So every decision feels incredibly meaningful. We're not racing to get through the paces. We're actually trying to make sure that the pace is actually the thing that will be the most satisfying for the students.
and Sarah McWright, did everybody see the 2-week kits with the Pringles cans that were full?
Yeah.
I'm totally stealing that.
That's great. And then Abby has some great ideas. Building a camera obscura in their bedroom. I mean, that's like the ultimate, isn't that the ultimate quarantine assignment? And even that relates to some of these basic ideas of optics and what you learn about, and drilling down to what's really important that happens, you know, depending on what you think. Yeah, I'm just looking at, so so maybe we'll set up a category for planning for students, in-class students who have to quarantine. I mean, that also comes back to Rebecca Modrock's, you know, Windows Serenade assignment, but
And just on that, I mean, the thing that I'm looking at, just in terms of, I'm on a number of committees at VCU regarding the pandemic, and you know, for all that we did last spring and the fall, like we are heading back into a scenario that's much worse than where we were. We're more prepared, but like the numbers in Virginia higher than they've ever been. And I know they are in different places around the country as well. And that's going to impact the kinds of things that we can do in and out of the classroom. So not to be a Debbie Downer.
No. So there's a lot of ideas coming in. Does anybody else have an actual classroom experience that they want to talk about?
I taught online or taught in person in the fall. I am an adjunct faculty at Tyler in Philadelphia. And I know I'm a little dark. This is like not my normal space to be on a computer, so I apologize.
Yeah,
but,
we're going to critique your lighting.
Yeah, I know. Well, that was, yeah. So I taught in person, and it was this like, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And it was a lot of work. I didn't do videos because I'm an adjunct faculty and I didn't have the support or adequate pay to make that worth my time, if I'm honest. But we were able to do, so I had a class of 11. I was allowed to do half of my class per like session. So I would allow students each week to sign up which day. That gave people flexibility if they like, because my class is at 8 a.m. So like if they didn't want to wake up at 8 a.m. on Monday, they could do it on Wednesday. And that actually was really great for most of the students. No one complained. Actually, people really liked that. And that way I could dedicate time to just half the class each day, but it didn't mean I double taught. But that like kind of is what it is. And what I ended up doing is that normally I have 4 projects that go from technical to more conceptual, and I scrapped all of that and I did one thematic project that they built towards all semester long. And it was actually like some of the most powerful work I've seen students do in my class, and it was awesome. It was all based on the idea of the art of the everyday, and so it was allowing them a lot of flexibility to explore what it means for them to be making art during this time when we're all dealing with the uncertainty of the politics of this country, the pandemic, and everybody's personal struggles. So everybody was able to have a lot of flexibility. We did in progress critiques instead of more like hard deadlines. And so they were always allowed to constantly evolve their ideas. And like I said, I think that instead of having more like a portrait assignment or a narrative assignment, which is something I normally would do, having that flexibility pushed them even more because they had more control over what they got to photograph, because they could photograph anything and claim it's a part of the project. And when it came to technical skills, I'm normally like really intense about, I'm not a huge spotting fanatic, but I'm pretty intense about teaching students about how to, really understand, film development, print development, making photographic objects, and really thinking about that. And so that was still pretty rewarding, and was really fortunate that the facilities at Tyler are large enough where I was really comfortable getting really into things with students. And so the one thematic project is actually something that I think I might continue doing even after, if things go back to normal in the future, because it really was I might change like the ideas and the concepts, but it was so much more interesting than just like making them do like an idea for a couple of weeks. Because also at Tyler, most of the students who take darkroom are sophomores and juniors. And so they're also still new to like having their own ideas and not just being given a prompt. And so like for them to like kind of exercise those muscles of like their own creativity, their own drive was like really exciting to see.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think one thing that I picked up on that I think is really important is that, there's a lot of time and energy that's put into preparation for online classes that we're not being compensated for, and especially adjuncts are not. So for those of us who have the privilege of being paid to prepare for our classes in whatever way we are we willing, and are there people out there that have shared materials or materials they're willing to share? Certainly, I don't know what you've got, Tom, but like a camera demo for KX1000 is going to be the same for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So is that shareable, or any resources that we've developed? If you want to put a link to them either in the chat or in that shared document that I put out, will help to collate that so that we can have a resource. Ideally, what we'd like to come out of this workshop is to have a new resource page specifically directed at this workshop that has resources so that we can pull camera demos and darkroom demos and so on and so forth, the things that have worked for people. So thanks so much.
Patricia, do you go by Patricia? That's what you're,
Yeah, I do. Mhm.
also, I mean, John's point about the adjunct is great. I was also struck by, while you were talking, how much darkroom photography is based in tradition. And I'm struck by how probably all of us have things that we hang on to pretty strongly, maybe more in darkroom photography than probably any other photo class that we teach. And I love your how you let go a little bit, which really was, in a way, it wasn't that much, but it was. And how, and then Tom said about letting them use the light meters on their phones, which does feel kind of like, you know, when you teach view camera, you would never let them use it. Oh my God, there's a light meter on your phone. So all these rigidities that I think are embedded, even for those of us who think we're not that rigid, in darkroom and teaching black and white, specifically darkroom. So I thank you for that, because that actually helped open up my mind a little bit about some things that I might be rigid about, that, God forbid, that I was not aware of. So, great. Are there other, someone else asked a question about gum bichromate on Photoshop. And I was thinking I think I mentioned that another category of analogous techniques in Photoshop for emulating things that you do in the darkroom. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that, or that could be something that we just put up in the shared document.
I also have a couple people who have unmuted themselves. I'm thinking
Oh,
with the
okay.
use of interjecting. Mary, I think you started to say something, but maybe I'm wrong.
No.
Just checking.
One thing that I'd bring up in terms of analogous things is, because I teach at SUNY Brockport, we have a darkroom, Photo 1, Digital 1 is the digital version of that, and then kind of like Tom, Photo 3 or intermediate and advanced are offered every semester, and you can take them multiple times, and that's a hybrid. But one of the things that I think works really well is like a lot of the processes we're using, like I did cyanotype, lumen, anthotypes, and then if I can introduce that to my digital class, I will, because a parallel would be using a scanner as a camera, which is one of my favorite things to do. And then another thing I wanted to mention was I got it from this feed originally when I first found out about FotoFika, which was way too late, but was a head-mounted camera obscura, and that's how I started my semester. Like the first day of class, I had drawn out patterns for them, and they had their individual cutting device and all the supplies they needed. It was only like 6 people. And so the first day of class, they had to build this camera obscura, go outside with a box on their head.
That's great.
And it was like, and they saw it. They were like, oh my God, I see the light. I see the clouds. So that was really fun. I'd be happy to share, the pattern that I made for that. And I made incredibly awkward videos with my phone, because I don't have any tech support for producing lovely, like what John's been able to do with VCU, and having somebody working with you technically developing platforms and stuff is just amazing. But so yeah, I just became known for my another awkward demonstration by Kitty Hubbard. Here you go.
And
but I'd share anything I have, and I have to switch. I had to end the semester early. 2 weeks we had to teach online at the end. this coming semester, 2 weeks we have to teach online in the beginning, and I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So those are just my thoughts.
One thing I'm going to re-up is that we do have a huge Q&A thing that we've been building throughout FotoFika that I'm going to put a link to, which has a lot of software and apps that people have used, because there's a lot of questions about film scanning apps. Like Kodak has a simple one. There's a few different versions that do that. There's a 4x5 camera emulator that also allows you to adjust shutter speed. It allows you to imagine it. The built-in app for the newest iPhones actually allow you to play with aperture and shutter speed, even though there aren't actually technically switching shutter speed. So there are ways to emulate that. I also think that that using the light meter is useful in terms of just demonstrating like what the heck we're talking about, what the fractions are, and you can see it and feel it and experience it in a very quick way. So there are a lot of resources. So, and we'll try to collate them in a way that's specific to the conversation we've been having today, as opposed to sending you links to last semester, but those links still have a lot of content and information in them.
Well, and I was also going to add to that, John, is that, you know, that Q&A and that database, for lack of a better word, by all means, if you've tried something this semester and you think it should be up there, or there's an update to something and you think we should know about it, drop us an email. We're happy to continue to update those resources and those lists, because I think, again, as we've said so many times, we're all in this together. And I think as much as this has been important for us to do, it's been really important to get the feedback from you guys.
I don't know if, I guess we're going to go the normal FotoFika time. Are there any questions and desire we can revisit in the future, and we're going to have this document, but are there any questions at this point, or there's tons in the chat, and I think everyone should read that, and there's a few questions, but is there anyone who wants to unmute themselves and say anything right now? All right.
Hi, I just was wondering which light meter app that you all are recommending, and I agree with you, Betsy. In the past, when my students were all about, oh, I'm using my iPhone for the light meter, and I'm like, no, and I have let go of that. But I'm wondering which one people prefer to use, if there is one that people prefer.
That's a great practical thing too. I'd be interested in knowing that, if there's a good app. Is it
And
worth
I don't have one right on me, but I will add it.
do.
Yeah, good.
I use Lux, and I use Lux for an entire body of work with my Mamiya RZ. In Europe, I just ditched my light meter at some point because it just wasn't, quite honestly, as accurate. So I actually paid for the upgrade to go for Lux, but they do have a free version of it as well, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
And doesn't Lux have a diffusion bubble you can buy?
Yes, it does.
So, if it's off just a tiny bit.
Well, I think, that comes back to some bigger, some bigger ideas here about, and I really do think it's useful to step back a little and think what's most important, and let yourself let go of things. And it sounds like different people are going to be able to let go of different things, which I think is actually great. And we're not all going to teach kind of the same class, which is kind of exciting. But I think giving yourself permission to let go of some things that you might think are absolutes, and also paying attention, I think, to how the students are responding. And Patricia's point, I think, or what happened in our class, where people opened up in a different way. It seems like I'm inferring some things that maybe you didn't say, but that was something I learned this semester, is that my expectation that things weren't as good as they should be, or there was all this sense of compromise. And when I could step away from that, I was a better teacher. I think when I could step away from my own disappointment about what I thought was supposed to happen in the class, things got a little bit better. It was when I got in that, like, this isn't how it's supposed to be, kind of, this should work this way, that I think I was the worst teacher there. That was the worst place.
And we're going to stay on and keep the line open for general conversation too, but we really should thank Tom for leading us off
thank you,
today.
Tom.
For, I think it was really helpful for us for you to share your experience with us so that we could kind of see, exactly what you're doing. And then I'm going to get a spotting brush and mail it to your students.
Thanks.
So thank you so much for doing that for us.
I got to say that this really helped me a lot last semester, in the spring. I actually rejoined SPE because of this. So that was probably a good thing too. Yeah, no, it's been, there's no, I really appreciate y'all giving me the opportunity.
Thanks.
I mean, like the next hardest thing is sort of like thinking about, okay, if I tear this up, what do I do? And then it's like, oh, so now I need to think about which problematic white photographer do I leave in as examples, right? And but that's a whole other discussion. So
which we will be having. We will be starting to talk about those in the future, I think.
I'll just say it's really fantastic to see everybody here and see familiar faces and unfamiliar faces. And welcome to FotoFika. And we're doing this for I don't know, for the love of photography, because it's really important to us. So great to see you all.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
So as John said, if you want to stick around, if you have specific questions, we're happy to do that. Have it be a little bit more casual now, as if that wasn't, I don't know.